Dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
Leading with daring might sound glorious, but in practice, it's actually difficult to define. How do we know when our daring is not rashness? And where can we look to find the surety we need to dare great things for Christ? In this fourth leadership lesson from the saints, we take a look at some of the comments by Jose Maria Escrivá. Not only did St. Jose Maria dare something great for Christ, but he described it as a virtue and a necessary component to anything that would call itself Christian leadership. Hey everybody, we're back with our fourth segment here on leadership lessons from the saints. And I think this is so inspiring to look at how the saints themselves not only spoke about leadership, but lived it out. And I love this because so many people today are stuck with thinking that somehow Christianity and leadership are two opposed ways of thinking. After all, isn't Christianity essentially about following Jesus, being submissive to him, obeying his will, hiding ourselves in love? And of course, the answer is to all these things. Yes, of course it is these things. I mean, St. Teresa, the child Jesus, was the doctor of the little way. Mother Teresa of Calcutta used to say, holiness is about doing little things with great love. And to this point, I remember a conversation I had with a priest recently where the priest said, he heard what I was doing, in founding the leadership network and working with leaders across the country. And he said, we're big into leadership these days, but I kind of wonder whether or not we shouldn't be bigger into following, like followership, and he was kind of making it as a little bit of a joke to me, and it was good. It's a good joke. He said, our schools are all about the leadership academies and the leadership kindergarten classes. He was kind of going on, but he said, shouldn't we be focused more on following and on discipleship? And of course we should, right? It's not that the two are opposed. It's that true following requires great leadership. And if you really follow Christ, he will lead you into leading others. This is like a bit of the paradox that we have. You can't simplify Christianity into just one box and say Christianity is about leadership and not about following or death to self or subservience or submission or obedience. It's just that our submission, our obedience is to God and not to the world. And that requires that the more that we obey God, the less that we will obey a worldly way of being. See, so we are submissive to God, and therefore we lead the world. And more. This is amazing because it also means that we become impactful. Our marriages and our families, in other words, are not just situations that happen by chance and that then we let go the natural course of life. We're trying to obey God in them. And that means that we have to change things that need to be changed. We need to parent our children, right? We need to lead our spouses upward. We can't just be, in other words, floating in the ether of the world or the ways of the world. We have to have this kind of gutsiness, right, to us, this grit, this drive to go somewhere. This is very important. There are many philosophies today, for example, that kind of like make us anonymous. The materialism that's in the world out there around us and in our culture seeks to reduce the importance of our individual choices, almost saying that the world will take its course regardless of what you and I do in it, that what you and I do, matters little, and so forth. And then life is short and then you die. So the goal is to have as much of a pleasant life as you possibly can before you die. This is like a fine philosophy, I suppose, but it's not Christian. And it's much less than the power and the beauty that Jesus offers us and offers to his followers. And for those of us who follow Christ and have the name of Christian, we don't follow a philosophy like that. We follow the teaching of God. And the teaching of God is that we've been given a Holy Spirit who brings us upwards to the Father, right? And cries out within us, Abba, Father, which means our source and our end goal is not the materiality of this world. Our source and our end goal is God himself and his love. And everywhere that we are, we're called to conform and bring and lift up into that love. And this requires sometimes saving a broken world, going into situations that are difficult, that require danger and threat, and that will entail suffering for us, right? The gift of ourself, of our time, of our talent is not always a happy thing. There are times when it really costs us, things that we'll never get back again. The gift of ourself is oftentimes marked by sacrifice, marked by the sign of the cross, right? And every time that we give ourselves in true love, yes, we find a deeper good, absolutely. And we find a God whom we love, absolutely. And yet it's done at the same time, through and in the power of a cross. And that becomes the boast of us who are Christians. And yet it's still there. And so to do that, to endure that cross, to go through it, to give ourselves anyway, even in the midst of the pain that a broken heart will cause us when we love those who do not love us in return, or when we extend our invitation to those who refuse us, when we're betrayed, when we're let down, when our own grandchildren don't talk to us, whatever the pain might be, the temptation will be then just withdraw and live as pleasant a life as you can for as long as you can. Now, that might be a worldly philosophy, but it's not the philosophy of the followers of Christ. The philosophy of the followers of Christ is a wisdom that puts all other philosophies to shame. It's the wisdom of the cross. It's the followers who say, I will brave the pain and the difficulty and the challenge that this life endures for the sake of the love that has put me here. And that, my friends, requires daring. This is why St. Jose Maria Escrivá is such an amazing coach for us, an inspirational person for us to follow. Because he says point blank that daring is a part of what Christians owe the world and what they owe their God. And I love that. Now, it's not the only thing. It's a small aspect, right, of a big picture called love and called discipleship and called spirituality, absolutely. And yet it's an essential part. Because what daring consists in, daring is hoping for a good, even though you are fully aware of the pain, the challenge, the sacrifice that obtaining that good is going to represent. Aquinas talks about it this way. He says that some goods are linked to evils, not moral evil, right? But like suffering. Some things that you want, you're going to have to face and force through bad things in order to obtain. Okay, so when you start your company, this is an example. You're like, okay, who wants to start their own business? You got to be crazy to be an entrepreneur, right? And people will sit down with you and say, you're crazy. Instead just get a job, find your happiness doing something else. And yet you've got this crazy ambition. I want to start my own company, and then I want to do it my way so that I can do it better. And I can do more good. And I have this certain good that I want to see in my company's culture and in the blessings of the profit that we're going to generate and the good that we're going to do. And you're full of this holy desire. And so the first thing people will tell you is, it's going to cost you. You're not going to be able to go out with your friends. You're going to be in financial jeopardy. You're going to have to wake up every morning at 4 o'clock, right? And so the question is, are you going to persevere through those things in order to attain that good that you desire? Or are you going to say that the pain is greater than the love? Now, sometimes you need to, because sometimes it's really not worth it. But other times you're like, no, this is from God. And this is something I'm going to brave. I'm going to take on this pain for the sake of the love that's pushing me there. All right, so to do that, you need to have daring. Daring is a courage to face fears for the sake of the love of the good on the other side of that of which you are afraid. Right? So that means, it's a great quote we can take with us, that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is action in the presence of fear.
The St. John Institute has a special invitation for our lady listeners. Escape to the Rocky Mountains on our 4-day Women's Fall Colors Retreat, September 29th through October 2nd, where you'll have the opportunity to examine what leadership looks like in the context of the feminine genius as spouse, mother, sister, daughter, and friend. Spend time with our Lord in Mass, adoration, and confession, and hike the grandeur of the Rocky Mountains. Be pampered with good meals, beautiful scenery, and great friends. Visit stjohninstitute.org to sign up. We look forward to seeing you.
Anyone who's tried to endeavor anything great has had to stare down the real cost that greatness is going to call for them. And there's two types of people. There's people that when they see that cost, run away and just yield and say it's not worth it. And then there are people that get excited about it, lean into it, and brave whatever is in front of them for the sake of the good that they desire, right? And there's two types of personalities. There's the pusillanimous and the magnanimous. And those are two different big words in Latin, but they mean either you can have a small spirit that is retiring and shrinking in fear, or you can have a magnanimous spirit that goes after what is truly great and braves the daring that's in front of them. And of course, the magnanimous spirit is the one that belongs to Christians. Christians are not amongst those that pull back, right? It says that in the letter to the Hebrews. We're not amongst those that don't think of great things. I mean, look at how Christianity has made fertile the whole Western civilization, a spirit of conquest, a spirit of expansion, a spirit that's taken us all the way to the moon and back, and then from here to Mars to whatever. I mean, like, Christians are amongst those who have a vision that says we can do better. We can develop hospitals. We can develop universities. We can develop public school education. We can develop the physical fitness of people around us. We can make this world better, right? And that's a drive that's deep down in the heart of Christianity because we are a religion of love. It's just that it's hard to discern when and where and how to do that. Because sometimes daring is actually full of pride, or certainly can be, as we try to go after things that are really beyond us, when we would have been better and we would have been a better witness to Christ had we pulled back. This is not an easy thing to discern because, how do you know when you're just supposed to quit? How do you know when you do a calculation of the pain that's in front of you where you say, actually, this is not my call. I should not do that. Well, the first thing is to say sometimes it is okay. It is okay to make that calculation and to look at it and say, this good is not worth the daring of it. I mean, in the end, the challenges that are there are also signs of God's will for us. And there's many cases of that. It's just that true daring is that once you've seen that, no, this good is something that I'm called to do despite the cost, right? Then you kick in this passion of daring, which has become a reflection of the virtue of fortitude. And you endure you pay the price. You do what it takes. You put yourself in the grind, because we're not going to be amongst those who cowardly and timid souls that stay in the gray of neutrality when we have been claimed by the cross of Christ. And he has sent us to lift that cross up in our society and to brave whatever shame and mockery will come our way for the truth of the redeeming love of Jesus that we will embody through our bold actions. All right, this is part and parcel of the ethos of Christianity. And St. Jose Maria Escrivá, who is a Spanish priest, born 1902, died 1975, this man whose life spanned one of the most tumultuous centuries in the history of the world, he was someone who demonstrated that. I mean, not only did he become a priest at the age of 23, but by the time he was 28, he was founding an order of priests, whose goal and mission would be to raise up Christians who would sanctify the world through and in the very occupations of the secular society that they were in. He wanted businessmen and businesswomen and people that were engaged in family life to become saints there inside of their social settings. He was the apostle of the laity, who attended the Second Vatican Council, gave counsel to many bishops, and then rejoiced to see what the Second Vatican Council taught about the vocation of the lay person to really be the salt of the earth inside of the societies in which we are present. So in many ways, my own ministry and the ministry of St. John Leadership Network is inspired by his life. And we find in him, like a real example and a companion. And so he had to do this. It's because as he did this, he had all kinds of prices to pay. Not only did he have pain towards the end of his life from just being overworked and over-traveled, but he faced that pain as he traveled around the world. But he had opposition from within the church, opposition outside the church. People just didn't grasp his vision and would therefore, create obstacles for him and do different forms of suffering that he did because he was impassioned by this goal. Now, of course, I'm sure you're enamored with that because he was a saint and he was doing something for Christ, founding this order of priests, writing these books, doing all this evangelization work. And yet I want you to remember that same drive needs to be present in you, in your families, and in your businesses, and in your companies. Because, man, the threats around us are numerous. The things that cause us fear are numerous. I mean, if you're going through a legal battle, for example, over a non-compete clause, I don't know, maybe you sought your lawyer's advice and your lawyer said you could go ahead and do this, and then you did it only to find that you're being sued and that the evidence is stacked against you because you got bad legal advice. I mean, this can happen. And what are you going to do then? Are you going to quit? Are you going to withdraw? Can you find a way through? Does God want you to stop? But if you stop, you have to unemploy all these fine families and ruin a perfectly good thing. But if you don't stop, well, then you could suffer these terrible lawsuits and have to go through all kinds of pain. Well, what do you do? When do you discern? How do you know when God says it's enough? It's not easy. But daring is required at those moments. The daring to say, I will take the next step and I will try to find a way. And maybe I will have to take some hits and even many hits as I do it. But I'm convinced that I'm working the work of God in the midst of a trial, of a tribulation, of all kinds of things that are of which I am afraid. And could Christ require courage from his followers? The answer is yes. In fact, only courage can fully express the power of the passion where Jesus endured the shame and mockery of the cross for the sake of the salvation of souls. I mean, if we're following a crucified Christ, only courage is really able to speak the true depths of the love that animates our hearts. But this means that, guys, we have to stop being afraid. We have to, we're going to be afraid, but we have to stop following every form of fear that comes our way. I mean, there's good forms of fear. There's sometimes where we need to not do everything. But then on the other hand, man, when you know in your heart that you're supposed to be tithing from your company, or you know in your heart that your company could, in a more objective way, glorify God, or you know in your heart that you should bear witness to Jesus at the parties at your house, that you should say prayers before you have meals in your family, that you should put a statue of the Virgin Mary in your front lawn. I mean, sometimes people say, well, Father, what will people think if I do those things? And I'll say, maybe they'll think that you're Catholic, Maybe it's not a bad thing after all for people to follow Jesus and to know that you're following Jesus, right? I mean, if in the end Christianity was outlawed, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Or if it was outlawed, would people say, yeah, we're not really sure if that person's Christian after all, well, that would be a terrible thing. So I think, again, we got to be prudent, but then prudence will require daring. Because when prudence says that the path marked out for us will be a hard one, daring is necessary to follow its commands and to prudently engage in the fiery love that is in our hearts.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
I want to look a little bit at what St. Jose Maria Escrivá writes about daring. So he wrote a lot, and 3 of his books are very well known. The Way, The Furrow, and The Forge. Okay, these are 3 books where he puts together his thoughts in like very brief sentences, almost like maxims, that then it's very simple to read and simply ponder. You could take one a day and kind of go through it if you wanted. But he has a chapter in The Furrow that he dedicates just to the subject of daring. And he's got some quotes in here that I think are really worth reading and reflecting on. He says in paragraph 97, daring is not imprudence or unreflective bravado or simple pluck. Daring is fortitude, a cardinal virtue, the requirement of the soul's life. Okay, that's a powerful statement, the requirement of the soul's life, right? Because he's saying, hey, look, life is hard and life is challenging and love is sacrificial. So what are you going to do? In order to avoid sacrifice, will you kill love? Right? In order to live in security, will you kill off life? And he's like, no. Well, then if to live might be sometimes dangerous. And therefore you have to have the daring to be brave in those circumstances. And God, in fact, will sometimes require just that from us. In paragraph 99, he puts this. He said, I read a proverb which is very popular in some countries. Quote, God owns the world, but he rents it out to the brave, unquote. And it made me think, what are you waiting for? God owns the world, but he rents it out to the brave. I mean, obviously that's not theologically correct in every way. It's trying to make a point, right? Which is simply that, hey, look, the world is a neutral place in many ways. The ones who influence it are the ones who want to influence it. So why don't we want to influence it? You know, I've met some families that I know that started a school. Why? Because they said there's not a good school in our entire area, and so we decided to start our own. Well, that's a brave thing. How many hours is that going to take of their lives? How many years of difficulty? How many future confrontations could that, cause? All kinds. And yet they were like, yet for the sake of our kids, having the education we want them to have, we are willing to brave all of that. You see, it requires daring. It requires a type of supernatural courage for them to do that. And yet because they've done that, now hundreds of families have been blessed by a school that's been done in a way that's according to the teachings of Christ. What an amazing thing. And yet without that daring, it wouldn't have been done. And this is what Jose Maria Escrivá is challenging us to. He said, what are you waiting for? And that's a challenge I'd like to have for you too. Like, how long is it going to take you before you're finally willing to say, let's do it anyway? Yeah, it's going to be hard. But it's a worse thing to lose love than it is to lose sleep, And I'm not saying to always have this type of thing, because sometimes it could just be earthly bravado. It could be proud. Yes. And yet when you finally come down to it and say, no, in the end, this is something that comes from my love and that comes from God, and I'm going to do it. Well, then you put your hand to the plow and you don't look back. And yes, it will cost you something, but what you gain from it will be much more than anything it ever cost you. That's the beauty of daring and the beauty of bravery. And Jose Maria mentions this point blank in paragraph number 109. He says, there are some ways of acting that are so careful that, in a word, they are just pusillanimous. Remember, it's a word in Latin that just means that they're just really small of heart. They're lacking in courage. In the end, they're cowardly. You can be so careful that actually you're hiding a cowardice. I guess I want to challenge you a little bit with that, because, you've been saying for years and years and years that you don't want to do too much religion with your kids, that you don't want to impose your faith, etc. Remember, though, that every time you don't propose Jesus and propose your faith in an active way, you're allowing everybody else in the world to propose their way of being onto your kids. And so your kids adopt all kinds of mindsets by people who seem more intent on teaching them that they don't have a soul, and that the only thing that matters is being approved by their friends, and that material joys are the deepest joys, than we are about convincing them that they're children of God with an immortal soul that's called to love up like Jesus did on the cross. I mean, in the end, we got to remember that, hey, man, we're in a competitive environment for our children's minds and our hearts. And we're also in a competitive environment for how our businesses will be run. And we're in a competitive environment for how we're going to exert ourselves in society. And so, yes, prudence is required, but prudence doesn't always say stop. Sometimes prudence says, go into battle, go into harm's way, go where it is dangerous, because that's the only way that you're going to find victory and the only place where you're going to be able to bring Jesus. And to do that, you've got to be brave. And that's why St. Jose Maria says, sometimes we're just so careful that in fact we're being cowardly. In 121, he says, when I see so much cowardice, so much false prudence in both men and women, I burn with the desire to ask them, are faith and trust only to be preached then, not practiced? I think it gets to the heart of what we're trying to say here. And it's that in the end, action requires that we endure things that are hard. And therefore loving action and in the name of Christ, leadership will require daring things that are painful, daring things that are hard for the sake of the victory, for the sake of the love that's on the other side of them, for the sake of the fire that burns within us. And that this is a time in our country's history when the Christian attitude of daring is especially necessary. We have the opportunity to proclaim to a world today that's trying to build itself without God, that in fact, God is a beautiful option, that living a life with God is a way to true happiness and to genuine development of our hearts. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to shine forth a light in a beautiful and powerful way. And we just have to be able to brave whatever it is we're afraid of to make that happen in our businesses, in our families, in our personal lives, in our societal life. That not be ashamed or afraid of proclaiming the love that is in God, despite the cost, and no matter what it takes to do it in creative and innovative ways, because the God we serve is exciting and the gospel is full of life and passion for those who are willing to dare its proclamation.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.